This is Vet Life Reimagined, where we reimagine what veterinary life could be. I first learned about Dr. Gary Marshall before the Veterinary Innovation Summit in 2022, and I was told that he was usually found surrounded by people. He's a connector. Now, connector is a special word for me, as I love connecting people and hope that connector is a term people use for me one day. Now, Dr. Marshall cares so much for people, especially those in the veterinary profession. And over the last 5 years, he has been very involved in organized vet med, like AVMA, WVLDI, and many others. Now, I got him right after returning from the AVMA Veterinary Leadership Conference in Chicago. So I got him fresh off this very interesting experience. Now, while I had him, I asked him about his career, and then we started talking about AVMA. What does AVMA do? And what is special about this leadership conference that AVMA hosts? I certainly learned a lot. And make sure you stay to the very end of this conversation and learn why Dr. Marshall has such an unusual Instagram name. Now, on to the conversation. When did you first know that you even wanted to get into veterinary medicine?
I think I was 7, and it was just the thing that sort of rose to the surface. I think from some experiences with pets and how they, were resurrected from trauma and whatever else. We all have cats probably that get hit by cars, and going into the vet and seeing that, and it sort of just stuck that they could put them back together and everything's fine again. And so just since that point on, I kind of just put things in, figured out what it takes to get there and worked towards it. And eventually, after 3 years of applying, got accepted to vet school and no turning back since.
Wonderful. So you went to Washington State.
Correct. Go Cougs.
Yes. Now, did you grow up in the area?
Yeah. On the opposite side of the state. I grew up close to Seattle, and Washington State University is almost 300 miles on the other side of the state. Very different landscape, different demographic. It's a whole different world over there.
Yeah, yeah. So when you went into vet school, did you have an idea of what you were going to do afterwards? Did you change your mind at all?
No, part of that pathway to get to becoming a veterinarian. As soon as I could get my driver's license, I started driving around to local clinics and seeing, I'm ready to work and to try to get a job in veterinary medicine. And one that the veterinarian said no, but his wife said yes, was at a local clinic. A solo practitioner. He'd been there since 1952 when he started the practice. And so I just started cleaning stuff. I had to work up to like litter boxes and cleaning the runs and that kind of thing. And so I was working there for quite a long time before I ever became a veterinarian. And he was a fantastic mentor to me. Worked there at breaks and summers and all that. And I kind of figured that that's probably where I would end up afterwards, just because he wanted to have somebody to eventually take over, and it's close to home, and it seemed like a good spot. And my world was pretty small. I mean, didn't apply to any other schools, didn't think of going outside of the state or doing any of that. And so that's what happened. I got a job there after I graduated, and within like a year and a half, purchased it with another associate that was there at the time, and kept doing that until I branched that into cats.
Yeah. So what did you think about practice ownership especially from a young age?
Yeah, it was an opportunity that came up and kind of, that was early 90s. I graduated in 89, and it was kind of just something that and I'm a baby boomer, obviously. So it was something we just like, that's what you do. You go to vet school, you become a veterinarian, you buy a practice, you get married, you have kids, you keep practicing until you die. And so that was just kind of what I thought I needed to do and what I was supposed to do. And I don't think I was ever really a fantastic practice owner. It wasn't that part of it wasn't my passion. But building something, a culture with the people that you're working with and the community that you're working in was, and still is, a great passion of mine. I still love doing it.
Yeah. So how did you end up going towards a feline only practice?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a question I get a lot. It was not, I just said I'm not a very good business owner, at the time thinking of starting a cat practice, it was solely a business decision, not as a crazy cat person. And that was in the mid 90s in 1996. And my cat practice, it's called Island Cats. It's on an island in a lake right outside of Seattle. And at that time in that community, there's about 20, 25,000 people on that island. There were a couple clinics, and the average age of the veterinarians was in their 80s. And so I thought, oh, this is a pretty good location, but I didn't really want to buy their older, their clinics, their models, that kind of stuff. And I couldn't afford a practice. I couldn't afford land or anything like that. And so leasehold spaces that were available, strip malls, they don't want dogs with runs and all that kind of stuff in their spaces. And being able to afford a smaller space, less staff, less inventory, cats seem like a good way to go. And it's a little bit more of a niche because, pretty much everybody really likes their veterinarian. And so to try to get them to come to something new, it had to be a little bit different, I thought. And starting a practice from scratch is a slow go for a while. Just building a clientele over time. But I really, really like it. I learned pretty quickly that there's a lot of really good dog veterinarians, but not very many good cat veterinarians, at least at the time. And so I figured I probably should be that person and really focus on that. And one species is enough really to concentrate on and do it well. So these people that do exotics and stuff, it just blows me away.
And cats are so unique that they really can have this, tailored approach to practice. So I think it is a really neat opportunity. So when you started that, how common were feline practices? Do you feel like you were kind of entrepreneurial in this idea, or?
There were actually at that time probably 4 other cat practices within 10 miles of where I was setting this up. So it was at least in Seattle, and I think some other metro areas, they were starting up but still kind of in that early 90s, maybe late 80s would be the earliest cat practices I know of, at least around here. So it was a trend that was coming up, but there were a few here. I think the thing I learned most from starting my own practice, especially a small one that's just cats back at that time, is just how professionally lonely it really is. We didn't have the internet. We got together as colleagues once a quarter, maybe a little bit more than that at a meeting or something like that. But you're kind of out there on your own unless you're talking to some specialists, which there might have been 2, an internal medicine specialist and an orthopedic surgeon back at that time in the area. We didn't have any multi-specialty hospitals or those types of things. So your work family was really small and really tight knit, and people didn't go from clinic to clinic and have those opportunities as much as they did. It was a lot of work, and it was hard to do that and to have money to help with my family and raising kids. Oh yeah, I also started that clinic when I had a 1 and a 3-year-old, which
Oh, no.
maybe wasn't the best idea at the time, but it worked out great, and now have been able to really make connections all over the place, like through mentorship circles and meeting you and different organizations like Mentor Vet and stuff like that have really, really, really enriched my life.
Yeah. Would you call yourself an extrovert?
Oh, totally.
Okay. I was going to say that
100%.
impacts you even harder when, you get your energy off of being with people. So, and it sounds like you feel like we have improved. Do you still see some challenges when it comes to professional isolation for some veterinary professionals?
Yeah, I think so. Boy, that's probably a big, long topic for another day. But because I do think, and it depends on, like I said, like you pointed out, I'm an extrovert. But if you're introverted and it's harder to be outgoing, and you are in a position, there's not as many like startup clinics. That might be a trend in the future again, just because you can't really buy one, compete with the corporations. But so I think there are some out there that are really struggling, because we see on social media, on everything else, it's like we're just turning everybody away. We can't get people in and stuff like that. So if you're on that trend where you're struggling to get enough staff and you're struggling to get another doctor so you can see more, and you're working it all yourself, and you're feeling just freaking beat down, you're kind of embarrassed to reach out and tell people, yeah, I can't keep staff. Well, guess what? Nobody can keep staff right now. So it's okay. And I am, having a hard time seeing everything, because I'm also trying to be the HR person, and I'm also trying to be the marketing person and all that kind of stuff. So I think that still exists, where we have people hustling in that aspect to try to start a traditional practice. And maybe it's why we have so many relief vets that's their business, and that's their business model, where they don't have to build something. They just have to build their brand and show people how good of a practitioner they are, and they can get all the work they want. So I'm rambling a little bit, but I don't know if that answers your question.
No, this is very insightful. It brings up a lot of questions and topics that I've had with other professionals over just even the past few days. In fact, the relief veterinarians and some people find it may not be helpful for improving the career isolation, because you never do stay in one clinic to build those internal collegiate relationships. And I'm sure there's different extremes. You may be a relief vet for a small community, and so you might build relationships that way. But for the ones that are going all over the place, then they may not get as strong relationships unless you're just really good at building and maintaining those relationships. So I think those are definitely potential challenges, and where it comes probably down to the individual and what really they need, what they value, what is their support system. I think the hard thing is, goodness, we live in a world of comparison and competition. So sometimes we have to make sure that we're really evaluating what we individually feel is important and what works for us, and go with that.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point as far as those relief vets and stuff kind of going out on their own. But I think that I want to hope that there's going to be a sort of a reverse trend in that, because I think a lot of these relief vets, one, yes, they can see that they can, if they can do it, they can make a lot more money per shift, and they can write their own schedule. But I think a lot of them went into it because the clinics they were in were, toxic or weren't treating them well and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, I'm going to go out. I'm not going to commit to another clinic because the last one sounded good before I signed up, and then it didn't turn out so good. And so these relief vets will be able to see a lot of different ways of doing things and find out what fits best for them, and probably settle into one of those clinics that they like the team at. That happened at our clinic. When I sold, my associates left, and I was stuck being a solo practitioner again for over a year. And one of our great associates that we have now, we're back up to 3 veterinarians, was a relief vet that was like, this cat only thing is pretty sweet gig. I don't have to lift any Rottweilers. I don't get pooped on as much. And it was good for her to kind of say, I get another 10 years in this business. This is a good way to do it. And she's been great to have settling back into us and not doing relief work anymore.
Oh, nice. And so that gives you maybe a little bit more time to do all the other long list of things you're involved with the profession. I was looking, and your LinkedIn is all the volunteer activities, and it's all these different organizations within the veterinary profession, and going to several events a year, like the one you just got back from, one of the conferences that the AVMA puts on. So I think that's a good segue to start talking about, the hot topics with this conference and AVMA. So what stood out to you? Or maybe we should step back. What's your history with AVMA? I think you might have worked with them a little bit, and then we
Yeah.
can move into this conference.
Yeah. So one of the things that I love about Veterinary Leadership Conference, VLC, not really that it's in Chicago in January, but it's I mean,
Terrible time to go to Chicago.
yeah, but it's good. It's getting bigger. It was like 700 people this year,
Oh, wow.
but it's still all contained in one hotel, which is really nice. And I like it because it's sort of most of the hats that I wear, and as you said, it's sort of in volunteer organizations, kind of all have a little bit of a presence there. So, as you said, it's put on by AVMA, and it's meant as a vehicle to house the AVMA House of Delegates winter meeting. So there's 2 delegates from each state, and Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia, and then all the allied organizations. AAEP, public health veterinarians, poultry vets, all sorts of stuff. There's a lot of different affiliate groups, and they also have delegates. And so we sit and we talk about stuff and we vote on things that come up, and also do some campaigning and those types of things. So, and I am the 2 delegates. There's a delegate and an alternate delegate from each state, and I'm the alternate delegate for Washington State. And it's also a big place for a lot of state vet med association leaders to come together. And I sit on our Washington State Vet Med Association board, and every other year or third year, kind of depending on the pandemic, we'll bring everybody that can go from our entire board to this conference. So it's a good time to get together with them, show them how the workings of the AVMA work. And they have sessions like just for state VMA presidents. We'll all go to this one session together, and they will have a facilitator that'll brainstorm with issues that might come up in states and how they will work through those, and how they have in different states tackled different projects. And they also have, I think, just one student representative from each vet school. I think each school might do it a little bit differently on how they dole out who gets to go and who they select for that. And it's specifically designed at that meeting to not be a SAVMA president, SAVMA delegate, those types of things. It's somebody that hasn't really played a role in that, but may want to get involved in some leadership things and sort of just dip their toe in a little bit and get a little bit excited about that. So it's great for us to meet all the different generations within the AVMA family. And I also sit on the board of the Women's Veterinary Leadership Development Initiative, WVLDI is what we call it. And we put on a networking breakfast one of the days of the conference, with a little mini keynote and some little breakout sessions for answering questions and bringing those back. And so it's super busy. It's super exhausting, but it's tons of fun. And one of my delegate who I sit with in the House of Delegates, we were walking to dinner the last night with our state group, and she's like, "Do you ever just get like, not want to be with people, and you just get kind of drained and stuff?" Like, I say, "Nope, just looking forward to this. Let's go." She's like, she was so exhausted. I totally understand it. She needs time to be alone, and it's hard to get it at a very short meeting like that. But it's pretty cool. They do put on mixers, social things each evening, but there's still time to get together outside of that for dinner and just meeting with others too.
Yeah. And sometimes those are the best times is when you're having dinner with someone, and that's when you can have some really cool conversations, connect.
Yeah. And so it was, I love this. You had asked about maybe like one of the themes. I mean, we do a lot of the stuff the House of Delegates does, at least this year. We've done it at some other years, picked up some newer things, but this seemed like a year where we focused on previous policy. Every 5 years, any policy that's put out by the AVMA, and there's a huge booklet of them, has to be reviewed and to see if it still holds up, if it's pertinent now, that kind of stuff. So And so a lot of the things we covered, at least in my reference committee, were, just kind of how's the wording on these different policies that have come out before. We need to review these, and then we need to either approve them, or we need to send them back to have some more work done on them, or just say we got to do it all over again or something. So so that's a little bit, some would say that's boring, and I mean, it's not what jazzes me about the AVMA, but it's stuff that has to get done. And it is kind of interesting to see what you start with and what you finish with, and how you went from A to B as a group of varied individuals, from university deans to, research scientists, to guests in the room that could be veterinary technicians. They could be, stakeholders from other organizations or something that come in and they can comment on stuff. And so we kind of hash that out over an afternoon. And this year we did have every VLC, we have what we call VIF topics, Veterinary Information Forum, where at the previous meeting, the House Advisory Committee, so those that are sort of in charge of the House of Delegates, will propose some topics that we want to disseminate to all the AVMA membership to say, what do you think about this? And then they're encouraged to email back and connect with us delegates. We compile all those and we share those. This is what our constituents feel about a couple different topics. And this year there were like workforce issues. We talked some about mid-level practitioners, and do we think there's a place for that, or do we think that we just need to leverage our technicians, or capitalize on the vet tech specialty program to kind of push that up in there? Or do we just need to figure out how we can all be on the same page across the country in what we call technicians, and be on a level playing field from state to state to state on what constitutes that? And that's a little bit outside of, we don't have power over that as an AVMA, but we can propose to the tech associations, or maybe those in state vet med associations, to say, hey, maybe your state doesn't have any things that a credentialed technician is allowed to do that not every assistant is allowed to do in your state, because there's no legal guidelines. You don't have any oversight on that. Let's get your state to bring that up to the standards of the states around you, and then we can all get to that. So, and people always say that the AVMA works super, super slowly, but that's some of the reasons why, because it's a long haul, because there's so many different organizations involved, and we're not a regulatory agency. We're just a advisory and member services group.
I come from nutrition, so that reminds me of AFCO.
Oh,
sorry,
yeah.
Any nutrition nerds out there? So a couple questions from that, especially like the mid-level practitioner technicians. Two questions. One, are there veterinary technicians that attend this event?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of those are actually some of the speakers talking about some of those types of, how do we utilize our staff best, and those types of things. They're technicians. There's a bigger presence of the National Vet Tech Association at the summer meeting, but there are some that come, especially if they know we're going to talk about this. Like our state president of our tech association in Washington State was there, and we got to talk with him. But I don't know of those 700 how many were technicians.
I'm just glad to hear that they have representation there too, because I would love for them to be able to have voice and be able to talk about the topic that's about them. I'd like to hear their thoughts about it. So I'm glad to hear that they are able to participate. The other question is, and this may be very naive, but you talked about AVMA is not a regulatory body. So what power does AVMA have? Like, what are the goals of AVMA?
That's a big question, but we do have, we have over 100,000 members now, in the AVMA. We have a whole office in Washington, D.C. that is just there to engage with politicians on different bills that come up and educating lawmakers on what is important to us and why. And that is kind of a huge, and that takes money. We have a PAC for that to be able to, which, truth be told, I mean, I contribute to our PAC, but I think it's kind of just not, doesn't seem very good that we have to actually pay the people that we pay to represent us to actually talk to us. We got to pay them again to do that. But that's the way the world works, right? You need lobbyists to give money so we can go in and educate on different bills that are before them, and it seems like it takes forever for some things to go through. One little example is there is they all have big, huge, long titles that I can't remember. But when we have areas in the United States that are designated as like they don't have enough veterinarians, it's usually rural areas. It can be, there's a lot of like Native American lands and fisheries and stuff like that just don't have people in their areas to take care of them. There's either not enough money, not enough people, infrastructure, not a place that any veterinarian would want to live. And so they have these grants for sort of helping subsidize loan repayment and stuff like that for veterinarians that are willing to go into those areas and work. And they have the same program for human physicians to go into underserved areas to be rural doctors, which is great. In the human medical program, the grants that they get, same amount of money, which is good. There's a fair take there because we all have the same amount of debt, right? But in the human one, the money is tax free. In the veterinary program, you got to pay tax on it. So that's 30% down, and that tax money goes into a whole different pot. It goes into the revenue stream as opposed to just back into putting more grants in the place, and so it really siphons the money out of the grant system a lot quicker. And it's as long as I've been involved with it, I mean, it's been going back 5 years just to try to get it passed that veterinarians grant money for these loan repayment programs to get them into rural areas is tax-free, just like on the other side. So it takes a lot of work, and it's a big process. And there's I won't bore you with all sorts of different projects, and I don't know them all, frankly, but stuff like that us also as delegates and others from our states and stuff like that we have days where we'd fly to Washington, D.C. The last couple of years, it's been virtual, where we will take a day off of work, and our organizations, the AVMA group in Washington, D.C. will organize a schedule where us regular veterinarians can talk to lawmakers and their staff about topics that are important to us and why they should, push them or vote for them. And people, there was a big thing people were getting upset about. We were giving money to candidates that didn't think the way people, and didn't maybe have records on other things that people would say, well, why are we giving money to these? That just encourages them. It's like, that's not how the system works. We're basically paying so we can get in there and educate them on the things that are important to us. We're not paying them to say, you're doing a great job at what you're doing. Keep doing everything exactly the way you're doing it. We're just trying to get access to them. And so it's a weird system, but that's the way the rules are.
Yeah. Well, I find this really interesting because, and again, maybe I'm alone in my naivete, but I mean, how prevalent do you think knowledge of AVMA and working with government is out there in the overall veterinary population?
Yeah, not too many people care about it. And that's okay. I mean, they're there so we don't have to worry about it. But, the things that the AVMA gets done are really important. I mean, that it's the law to vaccinate for rabies, which is a lethal disease. We fall into place with workers' rights and all that kind of stuff. And there's all sorts of things that the AVMA is involved in that nobody really cares about that much. But and I didn't know these things either until I started getting involved. And but I'm really proud to be part of the organization. It's a bunch. I mean, all the delegates, going right up to the elected president of the AVMA. They're all volunteer positions that people just work to serve, to try to make a difference and give back. And most have been doing it for so long too. I think it's a great organization, and not everybody has to care about it or know everything about it or be involved with it. But if they have any inkling that advocacy and policy and those types of things is something that they want to learn more about, anybody can sit in on the House of Delegates meetings. They're all open, so come to conference, the convention in July, middle of July in Denver, and hang out for a bit. It can be a little bit eye-opening. It can also be pretty boring if you sit there too long.
Well, speaking of, you said that, sitting there, like hearing policies and passing them was not what got you excited to go. So in your words, what really does excite you to go to this particular event?
It's the people, getting involved with the people. I feel super, super fortunate to have been able to make relationships with a lot of these people, and feeling that there's a little bit that one person can do and make an effort and make a difference in the lives of other veterinarians, in the lives of animals, in some of the policy statements we have and things we push for in Washington D.C. about what's best for animals as well. But it's definitely the people and the opportunity to feel like I'm giving back a little bit for all that I've gained over the years of just sitting around building my practice and raising my family.
I heard you on Michael Bug and Jonathan's podcast, and I listened to both, or at least 2 episodes. There may be more I missed, but I liked your analogy about the candle, and that, we don't have to snuff out someone else's candle to make a bigger glow. It's actually when we light everybody else's candle that makes the bigger glow. I really like that.
Yeah, totally true. I totally believe it. I'd love to be a little bit involved in more people having their candles lit, which would be awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing that I really like about this concept is all these different organizations that get to come in one location. And so you just have this huge diversity of veterinary medicine all in one place. You are part of a lot of different organizations. Was there something specific while you were there that kind of came up that as you left the conference, you're like, oh man, that was a good moment, or something like that?
There were personally, I can't say on the grand scale of things, but one thing I do love about VLC, and I think the AVMA conferences too, is they always have just amazing keynotes, and they've been having a trend of sort of building them from within. Where, I don't know, are you familiar with Betsy Charles?
I don't think so.
She's a veterinarian, has worked for universities, and I think now she's leading up the Veterinary Leadership Institute that does veterinary leadership experience. It's here in border between Washington and Idaho. It's kind of an immersive leadership experience for veterinarians. And she's been tasked with finding people that have really good stories and putting them in front of all of us. And they're not speakers. They're not that's not what they do. They're not the typical famous TED Talk person that they bring on to motivate everybody. And this year, one of them was even a group that's kind of telling their stories about how that molded them and got them excited about veterinary medicine and chances that they had, or chances that they've been able to pass along. And one of them was even a student that they pulled up there to tell, a super raw, impactful story of hardships growing up. And I've known him for a few years, and I would have never known it. I mean, it was rough at times because he was having a hard time getting through it, but he did. And it even spurred me on to share some stuff that I hadn't shared in public before, in front of the whole House of Delegates about how my family's now going through cancer. My wife has just been diagnosed with cancer at the end of last year, and how that's changed us, but how everybody has really come together in that organization. Everybody that knew has been so supportive, and in my clinic and the corporation that owns my clinic and her work, she's a veterinarian as well. And so when we were sharing, we bring up topics, like how one of them was the workforce issue where a lot of people were just complaining, like, we can't get people. How are we going to get more people involved in this and that and that? And it just, thinking of him in that keynote, and his name is Zach Tooley, by the way. He's SAVMA president currently. Good man. People were talking about how the communities, it's harder to get people and get them staying where they are and that kind of stuff. And so I just felt like I had to stand up and say, everybody's just been so good to me, and it's such a great group of people that we all really care about each other and we care about the profession. And so those are special. That was a special moment. A lot of other little special moments. I, in the hallways, ran into a vet student from LSU named Chris. He's Puerto Rican. He's studying at LSU, and he came to our WVLDI networking breakfast last year. And I saw him in the halls here, and he said he took back the information and he talked to classmates, and those classmates started a WVLDI chapter at LSU. So just seeing stuff like that, being able to, another who was a Washington State University vet student, he's moved to a different state now, and talking with him, he's been coming to these, he's been involved in some other aspects of the AVMA, even though he's only out 2 years, and was able to, just kind of talk to him about what he wants to do. Does he want to stay involved with AVMA, and connecting him with the delegate from his state, because there's an opening now, to say, hey, what's the pathway to get involved in serving and becoming, alternate delegate in that state, and got them connected with my delegate as well, because we knew the person in that state. So we might be able to kind of nudge somebody else into some leadership roles there. Getting to meet board members from the WVLDI board that I've looked at across the screen for over a year but haven't met in person, and being able to share a meal with them and just get to know them better, as opposed to the 1 hour of let's crank through the business and then we're done. And so in-person conferences, whether it's VLC or whether it's VMX or whatever, whether it's Innovation Summit, and just I did that here too, as far as I just called up people from all different corners that didn't know anybody and said, I got a table for 6 this night on this deal. This is where we're going to go tonight, and get them to get to know each other, even though I knew them. So those types of things are just really special for me, and in hopefully, again, lighting more candles.
Yeah. Your connector skills in action for sure. I really love that. I love that we are getting students there, the multi-generational approach. We learn from everyone. Everyone has a good story, and you've given me a whole list of people that I'm going to go look and learn more about. And, that's part of what this podcast, why I love it so much, is that I get to meet all these wonderful people across the profession. So I definitely can relate.
And because of you, we get to meet them too, because we get to listen to them on your podcast.
I hope so, because, again, I've interviewed vet students, I've interviewed veterinarians who have retired, and I love being able to capture these stories and their wisdom, because some of these people, they've never written about themselves. They've never, recorded their wisdom or their very special journey and contribution. And to me, that I feel like this is a responsibility as well, is to be able to allow other people like this to last, and other people to benefit from this. And again, more and more candles, more and more, wisdom and improving and giving back, all of those things. I hope that this podcast can do as well. So absolutely can relate to that. Yes.
Yeah. You're doing it.
Well, thank you. Well, before you go, I'll still put you through the final four questions. So, my four questions are: what is something that people may get wrong about you?
Hmm. I think the fact that I've only been involved in organized veterinary medicine for a little over 5 years. After vet school, I mean, it was more than a quarter of a century before I had any sort of leadership position. And as I've said before, I'm curious and nosy, and so I just once I kind of get under the tent in there and just um, I don't want to waste time not meeting people and getting involved and doing all that kind of stuff because I'm over 60 now. I gotta do it fast before I'm out of here.
And the second question is: what is a hidden skill or interest you have?
I, yeah, I think kind of the one I come back to because I want to do it more is landscape photography.
Oh,
Just
that's right.
just to get away where there's no cell reception, climb a mountain, sit and wait for the light to get right. And sometimes I don't get any good pictures and just turn around and come home, and that's okay. And it's the people I do that with is a whole different subset than veterinary medicine. And that's kind of good sometimes too.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And do you still curl?
Oh yeah, I was curling this morning.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. Very cool. Well, the third thing is, do you have anything on your bucket list?
Hmm. Um, I've never really made a bucket list, but I think the way I'll answer that is just say I haven't met everybody yet. And so I just want to meet more people all the time. I'll probably reach out to some of the people. I probably already have. I'd have to look back and see, but that you've interviewed on your podcast that I don't know yet. So that's a good way for me to start reaching out to people in other circles that I'm used to being in.
Oh, absolutely. And I like to connect as well. So I don't know what is about it, but just being able to see like the right, like you hear something and you hear a need and you're like, oh, I know exactly who you need to meet. That is just
Perfect.
so rewarding for me.
Oh,
So by all
totally.
means.
Totally.
The last question is: what is something you are most grateful for?
Well, I'd have to say my family, my wife, and my kids are pretty awesome, and I don't know where I'd be without them. But also just the veterinary community, whether it's my clinic, these different organizations, those on Instagram or that we've met through MentorVet and all that kind of stuff. It just I am so grateful to be able to connect with so many people, and it just makes my life better every time.
Yes. And actually, that brings up that actually would be a lovely place to end. However, I love the story of the where your handle comes from social
Oh,
media, from Instagram, is it might get weird because I am also a huge Pixar fan. I actually have a Zoom background of Monsters Inc. That is one of my favorites. Um, but I would love to hear you tell the story. Yes, Mr.
you
Incredible.
you could probably tell it, but I can tell it if you want.
It's it's much better if you're telling your own story. So yes,
Uh,
where
yeah.
did the Instagram name "It Might Get Weird" come from?
Yeah, as you've alluded to, it's a Pixar quote from Mr. Incredible, as everything is going to hell around him in his city. I think his family's all like been taken hostage or something, and so he calls his buddy Frozone, and there needs him to come help him sort of take on the villains, and so he says, "Suit up,
Suit
it
up.
might get
It might
weird."
get weird.
And I just love that quote because when everybody else is running away and things are going bad, they go right into it and with their super suits on, and it kind of gave me that impression of when we put our scrubs on and we go to work, we're saving lives, and we know it's not going to be what we think it's going to be. It's going to get weird, but we're the ones that are there to help and to help those that are more helpless, and get our job done.